All right, so welcome everyone. Uh, Today is the last of our eight webinar series. So just as usual, we have our welcome and then an introduction to the Offsite Construction Research Center and Building Transformations, who's partnering with us on this webinar. I'll then quickly introduce our speaker, Patrick Crabbe from Berg Construction and the Mass Timber Company. Patrick will then do a presentation, and then we'll have a moderated Q&A and discussion. As usual, feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A. There's also the message text box there, and if you're having any issues, just message in there, and I'll try to address it. We'll get to all your questions at the end. So for folks who aren't familiar with UMB, we have two campuses, one in Fredericton, one in St. John. You can see here our Fredericton campus. It's the oldest English-speaking university in Canada, dating back to, I believe, 1785, and it was the first engineering, forestry, and computer science school in Canada. So on top of that, we have over 25 research chairs as well as institutes and centers, and have been instrumental in pushing entrepreneurship and collaboration between industry, academia, and government. The OCRC has been around since 2019, and in 2022 we went through our strategic plan where we focused on being industry relevant, collaboration, excellence, and integrity. And over the last 5 or 6 years, this has primarily been our focus areas: process and productivity improvement, which is often used through enabled through digital technology implementation. We're growing our structures and building enclosure testing in collaboration, doing some projects with Bird and so on, and then working on the benchmarking and innovation in the construction sector. A few words just about Building Transformations for those who aren't familiar. Building Transformations has a variety of programs, and they focus on fostering industry innovation by providing programs which help our members push the industry forward. There's over 2,000 members, and the organization's been around for over 15 years now. It hosts events in both Canada and the US, and is focused really on pushing digital technology and innovation across the construction sector. If you're interested in learning more about Building Transformations and their membership, you can go to their website. You can check out their Innovation Spotlight publication, the upcoming event schedule, and then finally just check out some of their mission partners who really drive the mission of the organization. Lastly, I just want to thank the sponsors of the Offsite Construction Research Center. So our founding partner was Osco Construction Group. And I want to thank the federal government for their support over the last 6 years. Finally, I want to thank our marketing partners. I won't go through them all there, but I encourage you to check out their associations and organization. Now, I'm going to hand it off to Patrick Crabbe. So for those who don't know Patrick, he's the director of Mass Timber with Bird Construction. He's also CEO and founder of a company called Mass Timber Company, MTC. You've probably seen some of their stuff in the in news articles recently about bringing a factory to the region, Atlantic Canada, that being Atlantic Canada. And Patrick's going to talk about volume to value, how mass timber is transforming Canada from forest to design and construction, creating a circular economic pathway to a low carbon sustainable future. On top of talking today, Patrick gives back a lot to different associations and things. And one thing he participates in as a volunteer is on the board for the Offsite Construction Research Center. So thank you, Patrick, for all your support, and I'll hand it over to you for your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Brandon. And thank you for the opportunity and invitation to present to you all today and for your time for joining. The title of the presentation, can everyone see my screen okay? Thumbs up. I think we're probably good. We're good. Okay, great. Oh, someone says no. I'll stop sharing and I'll do it one more time. Is there any change? Okay, I
Looks
see
good
some
on my
thumbs
end,
up.
Patrick. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay. So the title of today's presentation is quite expansive, and really I will be touching more on just kind of the cursory elements of why mass timber is such an opportunity for infrastructure solutions here in Canada, how it does support the forest industry. I'm going to talk about some of the benefits when it is used in construction, how you deliver a mass timber project successfully from like a contract model perspective, and then kind of conclude the presentation with a recent research study in partnership with the University of Toronto around the embodied carbon differences of conventional construction versus mass timber. So buckle up. Here we go. This is the best picture that really does describe how mass timber provides a massive opportunity for maximizing the value of our precious resources. So currently in Canada, we produce a lot of softwood lumber, which is in the form of dimension lumber, as you see in kind of the middle representation here. That is considered a commodity product, and predominantly it is shipped to the USA. Close to 85% of our country's softwood lumber production is exported to the US, making, the forest industry very vulnerable to any political changes. We have what's called a softwood lumber agreement where duties are evaluated every 5 years. So knowing that we have all of our eggs in one basket and we're not really maximizing the value of our resources, and they're going into an export market, often into end uses that we can't track or understand, it just creates a lot of vulnerability. And the forest industry is a huge part of our GDP in our nation, and we have a lot of land area and a lot of trees and some of the best forest management practices in the world. So if we take this dimension lumber and we are to arrange it in a different way to create a mass timber product, which is demonstrated here by a cross-laminated timber panel, which is a long spanning solution for exterior walls, mainly floor and ceiling or interior wall systems. And essentially that's all it is just dimension lumber, cross-oriented and pressed together to create very high-performing, lightweight solutions. And these are prefabricated solutions that can also be modular, as shown in this image. So it really does supply the trend for faster, more accurate construction that really does counteract a lot of the trade constraints that exist in today's market. Now, the other piece of the mass timber family is glue laminated timber. So I just talked about cross-laminated timber. Now this is glue laminated timber. And what's different about this is more your columns and beams, not your large panels. And again, it's dimension lumber that is just running in one direction that's pressed together. Yes, it does have to be of higher quality, but again, that just reinforces the value chain of forestry to manage our trees so that you're investing in them so they grow straighter, they are stronger, they have more space to grow, and you're ultimately getting that 15 to 20 times value out of that same piece of wood. And really, these glulam beams are, I guess, the main structural system for a lot of industrial uses, residential or office. This is the Prologis warehouse in Brampton, Ontario that was just completed, 260,000 square feet. This is our mass timber company facility that Brandon mentioned at the start of the presentation. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but we're around a 200,000 square foot warehouse with massive cranes, and we can cost effectively do this in a glulam and CLT structural solution. And the glue laminated timber doesn't just stop there with kind of your meat and potatoes post and beam construction. This is a Fastanet project, the Richmond Olympic Speed Skating Oval. If you've ever been there, it's an amazing building. It has around 100-meter span with hybrid glulam elements. So really what mass timber provides is a low carbon infrastructure solution that can work in combination with or in direct substitution of steel and concrete or conventional materials. This is not an exciting slide, but it tells a very important picture. And what it shows is that the demand for mass timber is now completely shifted from the west to the east. And in Eastern Canada, there isn't a lot of mass timber manufacturing capacity, where in the west, it's the exact opposite. There is a lot of long-standing mass timber manufacturing businesses that are very successful. And the reason for that is because in the East, we've always thought that our lumber doesn't have the right strength characteristics. And that's what I've heard kind of through my entire professional career that has been developing the mass timber market in Canada from day one, all the way to trying to realize manufacturing opportunities here in Nova Scotia. So I just said, enough is enough. I think that we need to really test our lumber to see if the published strength values actually are correct and that mass timber manufacturing is really not that feasible in Atlantic Canada or Eastern Canada compared to the West Coast. So that's exactly what we did. And this really was the genesis of the Mass Timber Company. And to clarify, yes, I am the director of mass timber at Bird Construction. And in order for us to competitively supply mass timber and grow the market, we need to have more supply options. We need to increase our capacity. So it's Bird is not part of the Mass Timber Company, but also Bird has been very supportive in kind of realizing the need to grow the mass timber market. So kind of from the side of my desk, leverage with many government partners and 2 sawmill investors, Elmsdale Lumber and Ledwidge Lumber, we handled over 1.2 million pieces of Nova Scotia spruce and destructively tested almost every piece to truly understand the density or specific gravity value, which translates into strength of fiber. And as you can see, the published values on average were around 0.38. But in reality, they're around 0.43 or higher. This is just kind of an average with lower quality and a mix with the higher quality. So what that shows is that we're around a 20 to 25% discount of the published strength rates versus what the actual strength of the fiber is. So that was an incredible finding, and it really does kind of unlock the opportunity for regional mass timber manufacturing across Canada. So this is where the Mass Timber Company comes in, and this is around anywhere from $160 to $200 million capital investment, and it will provide around 2.5 million square feet of construction area into the marketplace each year. And really, what it accounts for is about almost a quarter of the infrastructure capacity required to meet the growing housing demand in this province. So it truly is a regional circular economic solution, and it's low carbon. And we really hope that within our first 3 years of production, none of the product will leave Atlantic Canada. It will all be used in Atlantic Canadian provinces. So from an economic perspective, it's around 120 to 150 employees, very, very high paying jobs. And it really does kind of create and strengthen the ecosystem here from a forestry perspective, where we will position Nova Scotia to be one of the forestry leaders in Canada. So again, from a regional solution, as we're talking about trade wars that are happening now and, being reliant on export markets to feed our forest industry and, having challenges with importing necessary building products from, the US, this truly is a market-ready solution that has a massive demand and will truly meet the value of where we're going in this region with a shrinking trade pool of workers. So what mass timber does provide from, I guess, an insulation perspective of the USA, I mentioned it's a true circular economic solution. We grow the trees all the way through, converting it to a building product and using it in public and private infrastructure. I say houses to hospitals, stabilizes the forest industry, And really, it's going to help unlock a lot of wood supply and really incorporate the opportunity for First Nations to be involved. So as it stands now, we are positioning the Mass Timber Company to be majority owned by a coalition of Mi'kmaq First Nations in Nova Scotia, which is really groundbreaking unto itself. So what a lot of cities and various municipalities are also looking at is that if there is regional mass timber manufacturing, how are we going to help support, this use? And how do we really address getting heads and beds faster? And we all know through prefabricated or modular solutions, that is the key benefit. You can build faster to satisfy the housing demands. So here in the Halifax Regional Municipality, which is also kind of a mirror of what's been done in Toronto and Vancouver, is we're evaluating bonus densities for mass timber solutions. So step backs may be relaxed and heights may actually increase for what will be permitted in downtown cores. So we are talking about 12 stories of mass timber being permitted within the Halifax Center Plan when it only has to abide by a mid-rise step back of 3 meters. So what that means is you'll get about 20 to 40% more density, and you'll be able to build these housing units much faster. So that's this would be an incredible breakthrough. Just a quick business case for tall wood construction. Do I think tall wood is really where the market is for mass timber? No. It really is kind of between the missing middle. So anywhere from above 6 stories to 12 stories, I think is the sweet spot for mass timber from a residential perspective. But this is a very good case that had some excellent findings that I'd like to share. And this was for a project in downtown Dartmouth that was part of a design and build competition on provincial lands. And this would have been the tallest residential tower in the world that was proposed on this site. And working with Bird Construction and the owners and the designers, these were kind of the costing results as a conclusion summary. You would save about $1.5 million in total, and you would realize one of these buildings to be built about a year faster. So yes, it looks like there is a bit of a premium when you're looking at the cost of formwork versus mass timber, and maybe some of the unique engineering challenges that would need to be required to support a lighter mass timber structure of this scale. So you're looking at about $1 million premium in materials, and but then that is offset through the speed of construction. And as we all know, formwork costs are only going up. Form workers are in very high demand, and they're often dictating the schedule for developers. So this is, I would say, a very conservative solution kind of based on a project of this scale. Now, to truly realize the schedule efficiencies associated with prefab solutions like mass timber. Oh, Brandon, is there an issue with people viewing the presentation?
No, keep going. I was
okay.
Just, keep going. Yep.
Great. Is that you really do have to have a collaborative contracting model. And this is not really the most exciting thing to be talking about, but it is the most important thing to realize the benefits of offsite solutions. And what I like to say is that the new affordability is truly cost and schedule certainty. From pre-COVID to post-COVID times, a lot of the contract models that we're using, like hard bid, that worked in the past are really not working today at the cost of taxpayers and at the cost of commissioning buildings to get people in them sooner. So in kind of these traditional hard bid models, you really have an owner that's working with a team without a lot of input from the constructability side or market-based trade feedback for costing or, sequencing and logistics associated with supply chain. These are beautifully designed buildings, but when they go out to the market, you're really kind of getting mixed results on what you're going to get back. And what happens is it creates a very frictional relationship between the designers and the contractors that are bidding these projects, because they're often coming back very much higher than what the quantity surveyor had dictated. And then everyone just kind of points to the market and they're like, this is because of market conditions. And there's really no accountability associated with the project. So mass timber is often thought about as being a premium solution. And it really is not. It's an equitable, if not more competitive solution to conventional for some building types. And often why mass timber is considered a premium is because of existing contract models that don't really work. And I'm going to get into some of those details. But we often recycle the designs and structural systems of conventional buildings. And in a lot of cases, wood is a natural material. So you don't just add more rebar, much like you would in concrete, for a site-built solution. It's a prefabricated solution that's coming from a factory that has constraints about the size of the members it can build. It's unique to the species of wood that it's using. So it just takes a little bit more creativity in evaluating the supply chain and the materiality to come up with a slightly adjusted grid that would achieve the same programming results. But it just takes a little bit more effort. So as we're recycling, these grids, mass timber may not necessarily be economical with, for instance, a 30 by 30 grid, which is very common in commercial and institutional buildings. Also, is that mass timber is a structural system, but it's also architecturally exposed. So there has to be more thought put into, how you're going to be using and integrating your mechanical and electrical system. So you're not just putting whatever you can attached to a concrete or steel floor and then putting a drop ceiling down below. You're having to be a little bit more thoughtful about that design. So that's what happens is if you don't necessarily have a lot of experience, you're receiving this package to bid. Contractors and the individuals bidding the project are just throwing blind contingencies at it. So ultimately, that's the narrative and why that premium, I would say negative perception exists. So why collaborative contracting is so critical is because, yes, these are prefabricated solutions, like I had said, so there's an increased design effort. And often it does require modeling to various levels of details to do clash detections, figure out the problems before they happen on site. And so it is pre-construction resource heavy. And, you do sometimes have to engage the authority having jurisdiction just based on false fire perceptions. So there is just a little bit more thought and effort that's required up front. And this is a really interesting graph that shows just again why mass timber is somewhat different depending on the region of where it's being supplied and constructed. And this just goes to show that not all manufacturers are equal. Some have the ability to produce large scale columns and beams, some don't. Some have the ability to produce glue laminated timber, and some can just produce cross laminated timber. So you really have to understand the supply chain for mass timber to really optimize your design, and that requires collaboration. So this is a great example of a large project it was a public client, and they had spent a lot of time in the design without having a construction manager on board or necessarily engaging the mass timber industry for feasibility and optimization of design. As you can see, the columns here are very large, and a lot of the columns of this size would have to be manually glued together. So finding solutions to minimize column sizing and beam depth are really critical to the feasibility of mass timber. So when Bird was awarded this project and we looked at the design that had a lot of money spent on it, it was really just a matter of minutes to realize that, wow, if we change the grid slightly, we can reduce the wood volume in this project probably by 50% and save the client millions of dollars while maintaining the same spaces for programmability. And there are, very good grids for office buildings that are slightly different than what would be provided through conventional materials, like I had mentioned, recycling designs that really do provide high performing solutions. So that's exactly what we did. We just augmented the grid slightly. it actually created bigger programming areas within the 4 columns. So within each programming block, it had a really strong view orientation through the building because the beams were all going in one direction. It didn't impact the footing sizes for concrete. And really, it did create about a 50% savings in mass timber volume, and it saved like around $2.3 million for the overall project just by doing a day analysis with the right understanding of market-based constraints and in optimized grids. So really keep that in mind. If you are planning a mass timber project, engage the mass timber industry. And if you have a construction manager, really lean on them to work out what is the best solution. So I have also developed a early onboard procurement system. So whether your project is hard bid, construction management, whether it's getting public money or private money, and it doesn't cost a lot whatsoever to implement. And I have a full presentation on this that I'm happy to share at the end. And really, for all the reasons of engaging the mass timber industry early in your design are here. I'm not going to repeat them. All the client has to have is a conceptual drawing, understand a little bit about the layouts. You just need rough member sizing from a structural perspective, no connection detailing, and just what is your schedule expectation. And that can go to the market. And I've developed this evaluation matrix that you can evaluate all of the feedback from the mass timber suppliers to see which one you want to go with early in a design assist manner. And let's say the client only has $10,000 to do this early onboarding, then that's all you have. And the mass timber companies will tailor their proposal to provide the necessary feedback to you within that pocket of money. And if you feel that you didn't get the right amount of service based on the design assist, there's an off ramp to then go back out to market. So you're not tied to the individual early in the process. So again, this just brings a competitive element when there's limited information to help you early in your design so you're not wasting time and burning design dollars. Okay, now this is kind of the conclusion of the presentation. I know I've been all over the map here, but this is kind of the carbon benefit. And this study is very close to being public, and I will make sure that Brandon gets a copy of it and he can share it with all of the meeting participants. As I had mentioned at the start of the presentation, this was in partnership with the Mass Timber Institute at the University of Toronto, HAF, Climate Design, Kelly Alvarez-Dorian, Intuitive, Emily King was really the driver behind that, and Bird assisted from kind of the costing and construction narrative. So this looked at a cost comparison for all major city centers in Canada, as well as an embodied carbon analysis. I'm sure all of you know this, but it's important to revisit it, is embodied carbon is really what is the carbon impact from cradle to gate for producing a product that's going to be used as an infrastructure solution or consumed by a human being. So it really is your nutrition label of global warming potential, and CO2 equivalent is kind of the unit that describes that carbon impact. And what's very important here is that as our buildings become much more efficient, as our energy codes evolve, as our understanding of building science evolves, really the operating cost of the building is not really through the lifespan of the structure where the brunt of the carbon output is anymore. Our grids are getting greener and our buildings are much more efficient. It's now the carbon impact is being more heavily weighted into what was the environmental detriment of the products that we are specifying. So I hope that definition of embodied carbon was clear. But again, this was, I guess, the summary of this study. We had a concrete design, a steel design, a timber design, and then a hybrid timber design. These were 12-story buildings that were positioned in Calgary, Vancouver, and Toronto. And as you can see here, the cost dollars to implement a timber solution are very, very comparable to that of concrete. So it's quite exciting. And this graph down here really does show that global warming potential Whereas if you're building a 12-story office building in Toronto, you're kind of around the 5,500 tons of CO2 equivalent, and you're around 2,500 of that for mass timber. So it's pretty much a 50% carbon savings. So for every 2 buildings you build, you get 1 building free from a carbon perspective, which really does help jurisdictions and provinces tangibly kind of meet their carbon mitigation objectives through public infrastructure. Now, what is also very interesting is that wood is a carbon storage mechanism, and this is currently not realized in any life cycle assessments or any building codes or regulations. But half of wood's mass is carbon. We all know from high school biology the photosynthetic process of taking water and CO2 and elements from the soil and sunlight. You're creating complex carbon chains in the form of sugars that are stored in the tree as food, and that is the root of the carbon sequestration. So when you're factoring that in as a carbon bank, when you're specifying mass timber, so not only is it a lower embodied carbon to produce the product and put it into your building, but it's actually acting as a carbon bank throughout the life cycle of that building. So it's almost like an RSP fund for your carbon mitigation objectives. And really what that means when you realize the biogenic carbon store is that these can be carbon negative buildings, which is incredible because one of the greatest conundrums of today is having economic growth and population growth and needing infrastructure. It's all coming at the detriment to our environment. And this does provide a strong regional and circular economic solution that's very high performing. So it's exciting. It's very exciting. And with the challenges, like I said, that we're having with our trade partner to the south, it's really kind of caused our Canadian governments to get together and really understand how do we start to support existing industries and break down barriers between our provinces to make development easier and stabilize our economy. And it's kind of taken President Trump to make everyone realize that, wow, we need to be really looking at mass timber in a serious way to stabilize our forest industry and to create more demand for homegrown infrastructure solutions. So it's an exciting time, and it's the age of implementation, if you will. So that I guess I have to talk a bit about Bird here, and we are one of the only general contractors in North America that has a dedicated center of excellence to mass timber. So we have 15 projects under construction across the country now, and of all various uses. And within our center of excellence, we collect all of the data to make sure that we've got continuous improvement and education for all our operational and estimating teams. So we're very passionate about this and really want our clients to have a strong solution relative to mass timber. And these are just the main bullet points of what we focus on. And I would encourage all designers or contractors to kind of implement this same roadmap for mass timber success. So understanding your procurement and your design constraints, as we talked about, knowing your supply chain, meeting with the mass timber manufacturers to understand their capabilities, what member sizes they like to produce and that they can produce efficiently to make your buildings cost efficient. You really have to understand insurance, and we have all of those solutions. In fact, now we're able to underwrite projects of very large sizes for almost no premium compared to conventional construction. And there are a lot of QA/QC considerations with mass timber, much like any product that you're building with, and moisture management is one of those things. It's very simple. If you ask me, there are simple measures to put in place from design strategies to construction implementation. I'm happy to work with all of you on that, and that also reduces the insurance rate. But these are just the key components. This is the key recipe to elevating your firm and your company to be proficient at mass timber. And that's all I have to say. So thank you everyone for your time. Ended a little bit early, so I look forward to a productive discussion.
Thanks, Patrick. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'll just remind folks. So there's a Q&A uh, button there. You can submit questions through there. You can also submit through the chat. Patrick, I have a few to get started. And apologies if there's background noise there. But the first one, let's go back to the hard bid and mass timber. So, at the Offsite Construction Research Center, we've been looking at procurement models and the current financial products and how that has an influence on building faster, supplying more homes or healthcare infrastructure, or whatever it might be. And so I'm just curious, what from your perspective, like one thing is the collaborative procurement, I agree, is needed, but there's a transition in terms of expertise and like knowledge, right? Because there's people who have been doing their job a certain way for 25, 30 years, and trying to collaborative procurement, it kind of upends that, which comes with more time to learn and also a cost associated. So what we've been talking about is this whole idea of committing to trying it new, but don't give up on it after the first project, because the first one might not realize all the benefits that are promised. And we talked about this whole procuring a project to procuring a program. And so that's, if we want to really drive economies of scale, you have to procure beyond like an individual project. And I'm talking more talking about this mostly to public sector, right? So just curious on your thoughts on how we could overcome that, and if you have any experience in that collaborative procurement and some of the lessons learned from it, and what you'd share with the audience.
Brandon, it's a strategic question, because we're currently working with the UMB offsite group and using a credible third party, I would say experienced team to help us develop this framework that we can take to all of the infrastructure groups, we can take to universities to give them kind of the roadmap to adoption for collaborative contracting. So that's in the works. My experience in doing that is quite high, and as well as Rick Burr at Bird Construction, we are kind of the construction delivery model experts. And what happens is we often will replicate the framework of what has worked. So for instance, at the Department of National Defense, they have what's called a modified design build strategy, which they have used for complex projects for over a decade. And it is a very simple procurement program to implement, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to do it. And it's already successful, and it's currently being implemented by the federal government. So when you take that framework and you bring that to a post-secondary institution or a province, what happens is they always want to put their own flavor on things. So they completely mess up what actually had worked and complicated it to a level where the purpose of implementing it was lost. And that is kind of my recommendation to everyone, is why reinvent the wheel? We have frameworks for construction management, modified design build, IPD. Take those that work and don't change them. So yes, there have been a lot of various public groups that have changed their procurement because of our influence, which has resulted in expedited and lower cost project delivery. Hope that answers your question.
For sure. Yeah, it does. And it's funny because like one thing, just an example like that is we'll often hear, like us being based in New Brunswick, here in Nova Scotia, we collaborate quite a bit. But you'll hear like, okay, that this works in Nova Scotia or it doesn't work in New Brunswick, or vice versa. And unfortunately, I don't think it's that it won't work. It's just that it's a competency gap. Like people need to learn, and they'll learn through experience and trying it, right? So but you're right. It's kind of that fear of change. So I'm going to go to some of the questions that the audience. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say that like procurement is the greatest piece of red tape that we have for really kind of unlocking our potential as a country, and really utilizing our own companies and resources in our projects. And it's not that I don't think the procurement groups are not open to changing, but it is perceived of, higher risk. And as you said, everyone has their way of doing things, which creates certainty for what budgets are allocated to doing what. But I just really want to motivate any procurement individuals out there to, want to learn about what has been successful and which procurement RFPs we can share with you to give you that confidence.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's great. I'm going to go to some of the audience questions. So first one, there's a lot of comments saying great presentation and very informative. So I'll just mention that. But first one is, what's the sweet spot for scale? For example, for housing, square footage, either on a single site or across different sites. I think this ties into the economies of scale piece a little bit, and it's probably not a simple answer, Patrick, but is there a sweet spot? You mentioned 6 to 12 stories missing middle, but how does that equate to maybe the like total square footage or something like that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a measure of square footage. I believe now anything that exceeds like 96,000 square feet in total, like you need a firewall, and that's a little bit of a consideration. But any developer is just going to want to maximize their density on the site. They're going to build lot line to lot line regardless. So it really does just become a question of what is your desired unit mix that you want to achieve, and how does a mass timber grid, based on what structural elements the industry can produce in a cost-effective manner, how does that fit within what units you're trying to achieve, to really just kind of maximize the floor to ceiling height clearance. Like that truly is, I would say, like the algebraic formula that you just have to solve for. And that's kind of what we do every day. So yeah, if like anything that sorry, I'm using Imperial. I'm not much of a metric guy, but like around a 20-foot by 20-foot grid, with repeatable designs from floor to floor that all kind of align with a consistent corridor where you can put in a lot of your mechanical and electrical servicing. It like that's kind of the main solution that you need to investigate.
Yeah. So
And if it's student
so if
housing too, like there's different methodologies for mass timber. You can eliminate any horizontal beams. I would just encourage everyone to go look at Brock Commons. It's an 18-story student residence at the University of British Columbia. And it's obviously a much smaller grid space because students maybe don't really need a lot of space in their studio apartments. But it's just like a very thin floor-to-floor system that was very economical. So there's a bunch of different solutions.
For sure. I'm going to go to the next question here. So, do you have some more details on timelines, barriers to getting manufacturing of mass timber going in the Maritimes? So, just before you answer that, the other piece I might tack on is when you're thinking about that carbon piece. Obviously, right now we're importing. Like, let's say if there's a project in New Brunswick, we're importing mass timber, say potentially from northern Quebec or further west. Is that a consideration as well? And I'm guessing that's probably how you're building the business case for MTC too.
Yes. So I guess what's the timeline for mass timber manufacturing in our region is that
And
I would
barriers
say
and
conservatively it's about 24 to 30 months before products will be manufactured and shipped to site. But we are in a position now where we have all of our design services and abilities to work directly with you. And one of our investors, I can't say too much information, but they are one of the largest mass timber manufacturers in the world, and they're based in Europe. So we plan on servicing the market with high quality European supply in the meantime. And whether you're getting your product from northern Quebec or from Europe, what's important here is that people just build in mass timber, that we learn the skills of how to do it. And we have the experience that is just going to create further efficiencies on other projects when we do have regional manufacturing. So I always say don't let the regionality of materials impede your want to design in mass timber. It doesn't matter where it comes from. It's just important that we develop the market and learn the skills.
Thanks.
But we are open
Thanks.
for business now.
Yeah. Thanks. So next question is, wonder what type of stakeholders are part of your center of excellence? What gaps and opportunities in terms of standards codes would you highlight? Um, and this is from the CSA, I believe, one with CSA.
So the stakeholders in the Center of Excellence is that really
Yeah.
it's just our operational and pre-construction teams across our 18 offices from coast to coast. So, and also it is our insurance broker that has been a main part of it through creative underwriting solutions and, how to demonstrate de-risking a lot of the false perceptions that are out there for mass timber versus steel or concrete. So it's quite fluid. Like we don't necessarily have a board or an advisory group. It's just kind of led by myself on the backs of our pre-construction and operations teams. Now, as far as specification challenges, there are two main ones. And really, if I had a magic wand and there was one thing that I could change in Canada, it would be in our building code where we discriminate between combustible and non-combustible solutions. If you have a building that is made of cheese or a building that is made of concrete, if you can demonstrate that it has the right structural capability and the right fire rating, why does it necessarily matter if it's combustible or non-combustible when there are fire suppression systems? So like mass timber is the only product out there that will insulate itself in the event of a fire. It is incredible fire mitigation, natural strategies. That's what wood does. But it's just because it's looked at like dimension lumber and people use wood to burn to heat their home, it's considered a combustible solution, even though it could have the same performance requirement as non-combustible, and therefore it's discounted in the majority of building classifications. So I really feel everything needs to be performance based, and what it's called is or equivalent. It's like non-combustible or equivalent, and you would just do the alternate solution to demonstrate that it's as safe, if not safer, than the approved one. So that's the main thing. It's just change that language. And the second one is that we have design requirements throughout all of our provinces in Canada that were written many, many years ago, and they're never really challenged, and they're just kind of treated as the gospel. And they also carry forward that language a lot of the time. Like for primary schools in Nova Scotia, you cannot use combustible materials in the exterior wall. It's like, it's unbelievable. So there are just those kind of those are the two main specification barriers that I think every jurisdiction needs to address.
Yeah, and Patrick, there's been quite a few studies done and burn tests and things to kind of try and dispel some of that, right? Which you or the Wood
Absolutely.
Council or others could point people to. Yeah.
Yeah, just type in
Yeah.
the CWC fire test. All the information is there, and hence why a lot of European jurisdictions have been using mass timber since the early to late 90s, and a lot of their buildings aren't even sprinklered.
The next question comes from a colleague over in the UK, Stephen, and actually it is fire related. So in the UK, well, first he says really interesting presentation and interesting to see how you are increasing uptake of mass timber. So in the UK, they're having massive challenges around fire, particularly in medium and high rise buildings following the Grenfell fire. Have you seen much resistance from clients, regulators, or other stakeholders over fire concerns? You kind of answered that, but maybe you can elaborate on maybe a specific example where it's led to a change in design, or just simply not going with a mass timber solution.
Yeah, so like the Grenfell fire, when you break down the cause of that, it was an envelope material that caused it to spread up the building. It really had no impact whether it would have been a mass timber structure, which it wasn't. So it's funny how sometimes these isolated incidents can really translate into a lot more barriers that aren't necessarily related. It's just all based on perception. So yes, it's created much more fear. And against that, like that's exactly why we're doing live scale burn tests and leveraging the science that has already been proven kind of across the world that this is a high performing and safe structural solution at all scales. So again, this is why I mentioned in the presentation, you have to engage the AHJ kind of earlier in your design process and just make sure that they have the correct information and that they aren't, I would say, poisoned by some of these false perceptions of, an isolated incident like that. But there really hasn't been a lot of increased provisions here in Canada based on that experience. But yes, I think that there are increased fire rating requirements for combustibles for mass timber solutions in the UK specific to Grenville.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. And Stephen wanted to clarify. He said, despite his question, mass timber is not the issue. It is more perception. So sorry, I'm going to go back to the questions here. So next, actually, this one's pretty interesting. So the person says, I had the benefit of talking with someone who led Brock Commons, which is the project at UBC that you referenced. He said that the client asked him, was that to prove that this former building was cheaper or equal to building it in concrete? This seems to be a common theme with mass timber, especially in the GTA. Is that what you're hearing? Is that it's still a cost driver in comparing, say, mass timber to concrete, or are there other drivers that you see from owners as well?
Yeah, so the ability for, I would say, the brunt of construction managers or quantity surveyors, cost consultants, to do an accurate estimate for mass timber versus conventional, that really does factor in, let's say, insurance or speed of construction, or even like foundation savings because wood is 1/8 the weight of concrete. There is a value proposition when you're doing these early comparisons that I just feel we're all kind of missing the mark on. We're just looking at it based on a quantity basis. So, if your unit rate for formwork is this and your mass timber unit rate is this, well, there's a premium, but it's like, well, no, you're not having encapsulation. You're not having any painting. You're exposing the solution. If it's versus steel, you have fire rating that you need to do with a lot of these exposed members. So the ability for our industry to put an apples to apples comparison between a mass timber structure and a conventional structure in these early stages is not where it needs to be. And that often deters the public or private owners from pursuing a mass timber solution. So that's where I like to say engage the mass timber industry early, or construction management groups like Bird that have this experience to help you with that early solution. So yes, the cost perception is still a major challenge.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I will say too, like I do think, and you mentioned hybrid systems in the case study. I think sometimes it isn't as complex as just a cost of one versus the other. There are many other factors that play into that. Proximity to factories, access to skilled trades that have expertise with whether it's steel, concrete, mass timber, et cetera. When we were talking about procurement a little bit, I think what you said, actually, if you're using steel panels or any form of prefabrication with steel, precast concrete, or even lightwood frame, that collaborative procurement is key regardless, right? Like that is a major, you said procurement is a barrier to really increasing housing supply or healthcare facility or whatever. That to me, I'd agree that, and regardless of the solution, or it needs to be solved. Do you have a position, I guess, on like hybrid? Obviously you're a mass timber guy. You have a forestry background, etc. But on hybrid solutions, and I know Bird has come up with some interesting hybrid solutions that integrate steel, concrete, and mass timber. I know your colleague Rick has showed me some of the stuff he's worked on. So yeah.
Yeah, like I think that like all materials, there's a use, like there's a practical use for either steel, concrete, or mass timber, and every project needs to be evaluated as, what is best for project based on the performance requirements. So hybrid really is the future. One thing I will say though, and this is again why affordability, like the new affordability is predictability and schedule certainty on cost. And this is where collaborative contracting comes into play, because let's say you're doing a project and you're like, hybrid is the solution. You've got light wood frame walls here. You've got mass timber solutions here. You've got integrated steel beams into the mass timber that's integrating with a light wood frame structural solution. And you're looking at it just simply from a design optimization perspective, but you're also kind of applying the dogma of like, oh, light wood frame's cheaper than mass timber, so I'm going to put it here. It's cheaper than a steel stud solution. I'm going to put it here. But in reality, when you're putting the different packages out to market for trades to look at, because you have so many different trades required, like a lot of mass timber companies won't touch light wood frames. So you need a framer. Then you need the mass timber company. Then you need a steel company. And if it's a union project, coordinating the crane to, who's having what responsibility of what to lift these things in place, it can create, logistics nightmares that translate into much higher costs. So having that construction manager and that market-based feedback that can push the fast forward button on execution can really help you kind of, I would say, assimilate your materials to make sure that, you're not just picking them to pick them because you think it's the right solution, when in the end, the execution is going to be much higher. So that again is why collaborative contracting is so important. And yes, hybrid solutions are key, but you really have to look at it from that lens.
For sure. So I'm just mindful of time. There were.
I'm happy to
a
stay
couple of
on if
comments.
people have more
Okay.
questions too.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
2:30 is my
I'll
next
go.
meeting. So.
Yeah, sure. So I'll go with one more. And before going to the next one, I want to mention. So Patrick referenced the acronym AHJ. For folks who aren't familiar, that's authorities having jurisdiction. It's often common, in Ontario and so on. But whether it's it kind of self-describes itself, but it's the local government or whatever it is on the East Coast that has final say with the building officials and so on and so forth. So those AHJs are often play a key role in removing red tape, let's say. Next question here. Is there a case for mass timber and housing supply for smaller towns, such as 2 to 5 story buildings? What are the limitations for this? And obviously that's key for Atlantic Canada, as we know, Patrick.
That's a great question. And I find that, again, this is where the industry has not done a good job, is that we tend to celebrate mass timber in very fancy building demonstrations or uses, and we even fail to consider it for just like affordable housing. And that's really the projects that I'm most excited about, are the ones that have true impact for people having homes and commissioning them faster. So the simpler I find is more powerful in this case. I'm just going to share an example. Is that this is in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, this project here to the left, and it is a light wood frame, 3-story affordable housing building that has just a 5-ply CLT floor plate that's exposed. So we had, prefabricated exterior walls and interior walls, and then, the cross-laminated timber was just kind of dropped in place. And this creates about a 10-inch solution for your floor system, because you have a concrete topper on top of the 5-ply CLT. This would be comparable to like a 14-inch I-joist, and which would require more buildup to your finished floor system. So it actually did present a more economic solution compared to engineered wood I-joists, because it was a thinner solution, which translates into less building envelope. And it was just a really good example and response to the question that you just asked.
Thanks.
And there will be
figured
a
you were
case
gonna share
study. Yeah, there will be a
this. Yeah.
case study available for that, and that's Rooted, I believe, is the name of the group now. They were the Dartmouth Affordable Housing Association. And one thing to your point, Brandon, and I meant to say it, but I forgot, is that I've never worked with anyone that has built a mass timber that said, I will not do this again. So when we're talking about different groups around procurement or people taking risks and just being a little bit too scared to do that, out of the hundreds of projects that I've been involved in, not one person has said, I will not do that again. So in this case, this group is looking at, mass timber for the majority of their projects moving forward.
Great. That sounds great. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you everyone for joining today. I'll mention while this was the last webinar of our series, we are wrapping up a national roadmap that we've been working on at the Offsite Construction Research Center since November. And we're going to be doing a webinar for that on June 5th. So mark your calendars for that. You'll see on our social media and through our newsletters and things that will come out. And we look forward to sharing that report with the audience as well. So thank you, Patrick, for your time, and we'll
Thank
be
you.
talking again soon.
Great questions, everyone. Thank you for your time.